This is Maggie Li, and you're listening to SaasHoles.
Welcome to SaasHoles, a show dedicated to issues within software as a service. We are revenue ops with a
edge.
Jamie, Jason, KG, and myself, Pete. We have a combined 100 years of making interesting decisions. Please subscribe to our weekly newsletter. Today, our guest is Maggie Li. Maggie Li is the current VP of Business Operations and Analytics at ServiceTitan and former VP of Business Ops and Analytics at ZipRecruiter. She's a strategic problem solver with a demonstrated success in delivering critical business insights, defining KPIs, improving sales effectiveness, and building high-performing teams. Most importantly, KG thinks she's awesome. But before we get to Maggie, we got a sponsor for the show, NeuroNoodle. Hey, parents of athletes, get a doodle of their noodle. It's a brain map. Hey, it's basketball season. You better have a baseline to compare it to in case you get that basketball upside the head. Get a brain checkup now so you have a baseline to compare it to. Schedule an appointment now at neuronoodle.com. Carney.
Yeah, Pete, come on, let's get over with it.
KG.
I'm ready. Hit me with it. I'm still going to laugh.
Why'd the man fall down the well?
Why?
Because he couldn't see that well. Leave us some comments on our blog at SaasHoles.net. Shout outs, KG.
Yeah, I got a few. Congratulations to Jason Putnam, formerly of Bounty Jobs, for starting a new position as Chief Revenue Officer at Plum. Congratulations to Linda McHugh, formerly of the Business.com days way back when, for starting a new position as Senior AE of Strategic Accounts and Initiatives at Veracast. Congratulations to Maria Alperez, Maggie, for starting a new position as Senior Human Resources Business Partner at ServiceTitan, an amazing company I think we might hear about shortly. And then happy birthday to Mike McGowan, currently of ZipRecruiter, December 20th. That's when we're recording. It's going to come out later this week. But happy birthday, Mike. Good to see you still crushing it over at Zip.
Blow out the candles. JC, what do you got there as you're typing away here?
I got Kelly Robinson, 4 years at Red Dot Media. He actually created it. He was a former, Broadbean executive that left and started up Red Dot Media. So give him a shout out. Good guy over there. I'm also happy birthday to Zach Secor. We had him on our show. He works at People AI, where I work now, and one of the reasons why I came over here. So give him a shout out as well.
Outstanding. Jason, Carney, you still typing there? What do you got?
That's what I was typing, so it was on the list.
Oh, okay. All right, thanks. Hey, Kevin Wilson, congrats. New position, Senior Benefits Consultant at Go Health. And then Kim Dickow for 3 years at Gartner. And then how could we forget? Happy birthday, Jesus. Christmas show, right?
Can you say that anymore? Can you say Christmas?
You just got us canceled.
You just got us. You weren't all inclusive, Pete, you asshole.
Yeah, happy everything.
Oh, I'm sorry. Hey, KG, you brought Maggie on. I guess you guys go back to the ZipRecruiter days. How'd you guys get together?
Yeah, well, I was asked to interview Maggie because we were bringing on I think our first either data scientist or analyst or something like that underneath our marketing team, because we were spending like 70 or 80 or $90 million a year at ZipRecruiter. And Maggie was brought on to help us, be true scientists, as Ian Siegel would want us to be. And I interviewed this woman, and she was super impressive. But she blew me away even beyond that, though. And we started working very, very closely together. And I would go so far as to say that a vast majority of our success from a business process perspective in executing on the strategies from the executive level came from Maggie. And there was basically a truism at ZipRecruiter. If you wanted to convince the executives to do something, get Maggie to tell them to do it. And they would do it because she became such a trusted advisor to ZipRecruiter. And I'm just so thrilled that she's on the show here today, because you've been so impactful to ZipRecruiter's success and my success. So thank you so much for coming on the show,
thanks.
Maggie.
Thanks, Kevin. Thanks, Kevin. Yeah, excited to be here.
You got it. You got it. So why don't you just give us the 3-minute, summary or primer of your, career. How did you get to such lofty heights that you're at right now? And when you get to the end, by the way, I'd love for a plug of ServiceTitan, what ServiceTitan is, because, a unicorn in the Los Angeles area doesn't come too often. So, but tell us about you.
Of course. I've done a number of different things throughout my career. I actually started my career as a programmer because I studied computer science in college, and I kind of worked in the financial services industry. Then I went on to be a management consultant for a few years. Then I tried product management for some time, and then after that's when I landed at that gig at ZipRecruiter, where Kevin interviewed me, and I was at ZipRecruiter for the past 6 years up until this July. It has been a fantastic ride. I think most of the time with that is through close partnership with Kevin, and now most recently I am at ServiceTitan as their VP of Business Operations and Analytics. So ServiceTitan, what we do, we are the operating systems for the trades. So if anyone hasn't heard the amazing story of the co-founders, it is an amazing story, especially as a new immigrant. They grew up in the trades. They really built this software to help their dad's business, and now it's powering this entire trades industry, from plumbing, electrical to landscaping, a lot of these other things. And really, it's end-to-end service. The company is very invested in its customer success, and you can really see that in everyone that I've worked with here, that they're really invested in their customer success, which is quite amazing.
Yeah, what's the recent valuation, Maggie? Like $10 billion or something like that?
Something like that.
Just crazy. Yeah, crazy. I mean, the valuations are nuts these days anyway, but absolutely fan.
I'm going a little bit off script. What is, for the people at home, there's revenue operations, there's sales operations. Can you please let the people know what business operations means? I've got an understanding it's probably data across the board and encapsulate and all that. And it probably is really revenue operations, just a different name, but go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, the naming thing I think is really funny, because I feel like, folks call it, right? Yeah, there's business operations, there's revenue operations, there's sales operations. And I know folks who are in RevOps teams who wanted to rebrand it to BizOps, and the folks who are in BizOps team wanted to rebrand to RevOps. So I think really, you get different flavor of it. But the way I think about it is really comes down to, right, like, what does the team do? What is the team's responsibility? I think at a high level, the way I think about it is, if you think about a spectrum, on one end, you think about kind of your typical finance FP&A, right, where everything is kind of abstracted, right? If you think about kind of the model the FP&A runs that plans then for the entire company, everything gets abstracted to some sort of input in a spreadsheet, right? Whether it's your close rate, whether it's your AOV, all becomes just a number, right? Or a scenario. Then if you think about on the other end of the spectrum, an individual salesperson who's just trying to hit their quota, right? It is every single call they're making, right? Every objection they're trying to overcome. These two are quite different. And to bridge these two ends of the spectrum, right? You have folks who's then taking exactly what's happening on the ground, right? And understanding the driver behind that and translating that into some sort of number or metrics that then can be used as input to this model that doesn't just go just for sales, right? It goes beyond the whole company, because there's a lot of implication in terms of marketing, R&D, all of those things, right? So if you think about it, really, I think whether it's RevOps, BizOps, it just covers, I think, somewhere in between the spectrum, right?
Yeah.
And again, my focus hasn't always been in just with sales focus. It also includes, marketing and product, and therefore I think BizOps perhaps in a way is more encompassing. But at the end of the day, it's the same, right? It's really to connect what's happening on the ground, what people actually do from activity, from a value generation perspective, to the company planning level, right? These go through different levels of abstraction. And really, so I think somewhere in the middle, you have these teams that playing these roles and they can cut differently. But if you think about functionally, the folks you have on the BizOps or RevOps team, right, they typically have some sort of financial modeling skills, data analysis, processes, good understanding of systems and technology, right? So, it's kind of, it shows how encompassing, right, this role can be.
I think revenue ops and biz ops are synonymous, because revenue ops doesn't mean you're just focused on marketing and sales. The whole company should be focused on driving revenue, and that encompasses product as well as finance. And so therefore, when you say yourself revenue ops, I always say that means you're out of just focused on sales and sales productivity, and you're more focused on overall company structure, overall company strategy. And biz ops is the exact same thing. Rev ops is more of a newer term, and it's more of an elevated, but when you're in sales ops, I'm always questioning, should you be rev ops or not? Are you stuck in just like doing sales comp plans and sales productivity and sales quotas and stuff like that and territory management? Or are you doing more than just that? And then therefore you're more in rev ops. That's just my opinion. I could be wrong. I am also wrong a lot, but I just thought I would start there.
If you haven't figured it out, Maggie, Jamie is our resident RevOps representative to us meatheads, Pete and myself.
Well, KG, I wouldn't call you a meathead.
Well, to my face.
I'll end it right there.
Whatever.
Yeah, awesome.
Maggie, last week we had Lauren Bailey on. She's the founder of Girls Club. I'll say hashtag Girls Club. She's pretty passionate about helping women earn sales leadership roles. I understand you're pretty passionate about the same thing. Can you talk about STEM fields? What is STEM? STEM? Can you give us a little insight?
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, now you're putting me on the spot. I think it's, let me make sure I get the acronyms right. I think it's science, technology, engineering, and mathematics.
Now,
is that right?
STEAM, I think. Yeah, she is correct. But I think what is the A, analysis, or is it agriculture? I don't know. I know in my kids' class, they call it STEAM now.
I hate acronyms.
It drives me nuts.
People just nod their head. Oh, yeah, I understand what you're talking about, especially the new people that come on board and they never figure it out. And we're speaking in two different languages. But Maggie, you want to help women move up in the company. How do you do that where you're currently at?
Well, actually, my interest in the, kind of promote or ignite girls' interest in the STEM field, that goes back a little bit earlier, not so much as kind of where my career is at now. I said, kind of briefly mentioned earlier, I studied computer science, which is, an engineering discipline back in college. And I know things are quite different today, but 20 years ago, I think, I was among very few girls, that's in that field. And with that, I think similar to, when folks think about women in leadership today, is just, there really is, kind of challenges stemmed from just a lack of representation, right? I was always one of very few women in my class, and this feeling of like, I don't belong, right? Because, there are certain fields are meant for boys and not girls, and, and thinking that I got there, this kind of imposter syndrome that I've suffered for, many years. And it's not until many, many years later, after I've kind of gone through a lot of kind of different things, to look back on that experience and realize the impact it had on me, right? At the time when I was going through college, it didn't occur to me that, like, my desire to look for upperclassmen who were women in computer science, or, and how important, and why I had such a strong desire. And that's why. So at one point I was an instructor for girls who code. Really just wanted to help, young girls. This is, girls that are kind of still in middle school or high school, for them to, because I think a lot of times, we have this interest, but again, because it might be a more male dominated field, and this feeling of like, whether that's for me or not. But I have to say, things have, I think, changed quite a bit since, my own experience, and to the direction. I mentioned, being an instructor because, I remember in class and kind of talking to the girls about, right, kind of trying to get them to see it's not, if they ever have these feelings, if they don't belong, that's not really the case, all of that. But then they were telling me like, the engineering program they're going into to college, they have like more than 50% women nowadays, right, which is a very positive direction. So that's something that I'm very pleased to say, or very pleased to see. But I would just say, I think similar to any woman come on here would say, invested in women leadership. I think it's the same, right? I think you've gone through a challenging experience and you really wanted to kind of be there for other girls or women who, who are perhaps earlier in the path, and help them, give them the encouragement. I think really confidence is a big thing, just to give them the encouragement, that, right, that they should be able to pursue whatever they wanted to pursue.
So let's expand on that, actually. So if you were to wind the clock back and do anything differently with respect to your experience at the time, knowing what you know now, would you do anything differently? And would you give what specific tips would you give other women that are in STEM fields or want to be in STEM fields?
I think seek out a great support network is important. I think, I did, this is not something that I haven't done, but like, in college, there's the Society of Women Engineers, right? And like I said, I didn't know at the time, but I really, like, there was this one, when I was a freshman, there was this one, upperclassman, she's a computer science major, and I just really looked up to her, right? I just couldn't, I wanted to kind of learn from her experience, because again, right, trying to imagine what I would be like going through the challenges of school. Like, the first thing I wanted to look for someone who's just like me and going through that. So I think, I think more of these programs that can facilitate, right? So that if someone who's coming in, especially to perhaps a big program, right, that help them to be able to identify these like networks that they can find support, will be extremely helpful. That has been really helpful for myself.
And here's a twist. If you were to wind the clock back, are there any tips that you would give to your male counterparts at the time to help you at the time?
I think just awareness, right? I think a lot of times folks, right, either make comments or, I don't think they necessarily mean it. I think it's more ignorance than anything else. But again, I think, I feel like society have progressed in the right direction. I feel like folks today are right, a lot more sensitive, right? Versus, I think 20 years ago, sometimes it's, not make a big deal that, right, that you're one of, right, whatever, I 8 or 10 people out of an entire program that's women, and kind of single you out and things like that. But I would just say awareness that, right, that like it could be a very different experience for a minority of, right, any sort of go through an experience, right, that could be a very different experience for, and versus someone who's not a minority. So I think that just awareness will be really helpful.
I was going to say, that's refreshing to hear that you say there's progression over the last 20 years, because if you listen to the most recent media, it seems like we're going the wrong direction and fast. And I feel like that's completely, in my opinion, I've got 3 daughters, and I feel like it's completely against what I see on the ground. But yet when I listen to the media, I'm always like, oh my gosh, I'm an awful person. One of the things that you've worked now at 2 unicorns. I know Zip is no longer a unicorn because they're public, right? But tell me a little bit of your experience and how you work at these high growth companies. How'd you get involved in there? And just like other things that you're like, what are you bringing from ZipRecruiter to ServiceTitan? Or obviously they recruited you away. Just go into that whole concept there of the difference between.
Yeah, sure. Well, I think, obviously both companies are high growth, but kind of in relation to my own experience, I joined these two companies at very different stages, right? When I joined ZipRecruiter, they were still, I think they were like perhaps like 250 people at the time. And, now ServiceTitan, it's right, it's a much larger company. So I think the stages are quite different. So the challenges are different too. But I do think that having gone through the ZipRecruiter experience, you do see kind of certain challenges right along the way. And even during my time at Zip, I always kind of, look back and think about, with the benefit of hindsight, if I would have done something differently, right? Or right. And so I think my takeaway really is, in hindsight, I always wish that I had invested more in scale, right? In the, longer term solutions and focus less on the more ad hoc in the moment things. However, I also understand when you're in the kind of momentum, right? When you're in the moment, it's very difficult to not go for kind of what's right in front of you and really think, a bigger picture. But here at ServiceTitan, again, at the scale that they're at right now, definitely for myself, there's a big emphasis on scale and invest in solutions and processes and systems that is right scalable, right? That is here to stay for the next, let's say, 3 to 5 years, right?
So right there, you said less on ad hoc,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I think this is very important. I know when I was at Career Builder, when I took over the whole data analytics team, I said to my whole team, and I'd say to everyone, the first rule, the data analytics team, is there is no ad hoc. The second rule is there is no ad hoc. We all know there's ad hoc, like Fight Club, but give us some examples, or an example, like at ZipRecruiter, where long-term scale was probably thrown on the back burner due to a fire drill needed for ad hoc, and you wish.
Yeah. Well,
You don't have to get specific, but you can throw Kevin or KG under the bus if he's the
Yeah, please.
Well, yeah, but I would clarify when I say ad hoc here, is not, I think it's in comparison to kind of the longer term solution I was describing. I don't think it's ad hoc in the sense that it's just something that you throw away right away, but it is more that I think, at a startup, typically, right, everyone adopts this MVP process, right? You always want to see some sort of indication of positive return before you, right, continue to invest.
MVP, I just want to define that as minimal viable product for the listeners at home. So go ahead.
Thank you. And so initially, you always wanted to kind of, especially I think this is more applicable to companies early on in their growth trajectory, right? Where you wanted to make sure that you invest your resources at the right. Perhaps you have limited resources, right? So you want to make sure you don't just go all in on something without seeing there's some sort of return first. So there's always a struggle of like how much you invest in building something that is long lasting, which would be more costly, more likely, versus something that perhaps you sustain, over this MVP period. Right. And then we all know how the story unfolds. Once you get to the MVP, you actually see positive scale, then you want to see the next thing. So this, solution you put forth that really just an MVP solution somehow gets wrapped into, right, kind of this much longer solution. And I don't necessarily think that's the right or wrong approach. I just think that it's a trade-off that you constantly have to think about and reevaluate. Right. So, an example I can give you at Zip is, so, we at Zip, we have a very test driven, experiment driven culture, right? So we do a lot of testing. And we want to see the results. So we invested, a lot of just getting the right data into the hands, the right insights into the hand of our stakeholders. But, we've let our data infrastructure, and as a result, we haven't invested as much in our data infrastructure, which what that means is it puts a lot of the work on the individual analyst to essentially build the right data set to be able to answer the question. And, over time, and that worked really well for us for, the first, I would say, 5 years, right? But at some point, it reaches scale where it becomes difficult to onboard an analyst to have that type of knowledge, able to do that. So then the question I always ask myself is, at what point, right, should we have spend more time investing in kind of the infrastructure. So take that load more and build that into the system rather than on the individual analyst. I still don't have a clear answer because at the same time, right, the return is, the reason we do that is because there's great return in getting things in a timely manner into the hand of the stakeholder so that we can make the right decision to move forward. So, I really think that it's a trade-off, and you just have to kind of decide what's more important to you.
For a lot of people that are analysts out there that are doing that type of work, I know that type of work, I live that type of work. And I would say if you're an analyst doing that type of work, you might take comfort in feeling that it's job security because I'm pulling together all this stuff, but it's hard for you to take on additional work when you're bogged down in compiling all the data. And you as an individual should be thinking of scale and proposing it to your boss and upstream so that you can invest time in scale and you can take on more work, and don't say the day-to-day of me compiling this data is so valuable for the company that I've got ultimate job security. That doesn't progress your career. That just
Yep, I totally agree. One thing I often tell the analysts on my team when they tell me kind of, right, they wanted to take on more responsibilities, they wanted to learn more. My ask is always, that sounds great. Let's list out all the things. Let's rank order all the things that you do from kind of the most value add to the least value add. Let's figure out a way to automate away the things on the bottom. Right, because once you automate that away, that's how you free yourself to do them. More important things, and that actually has been very helpful in helping the analysts to think through what are the things that we should be actively trying to automate away rather than just doing it. And then they also understand that is right. Not automating those things away is standing in the way of them learning more things.
I would always say, before Tableau was involved, I would always tell people, whatever you're doing on a daily, weekly basis, stop and see if someone cares, right? That's your number one way. Now, Tableau, what a lot of people who don't know Tableau, and I know you probably know Tableau, but the people who don't know, you can see who views it and how many times they viewed it. So you'd be able to do that on your own. But I would always tell people like, hey, you know what? If you're not hearing back about this, stop doing it. See if anyone cares. And if they stop caring, then fine, you're done. It's off your list, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's the same advice I would say. Scale. Everyone in the entire company should be thinking about scale at all times. If you're not, then you're just creating a lot of busy work.
How should sales leaders deal with biz ops or rev ops? Now, I've been out of the sales gig for a few years now, but I don't think much has changed where you get a quota and then you whine to sales ops and say, oh, it's too high. Can you help me justify why it should be lower? Versus coming in beforehand and, saying, hey, this is what my team has the capability of doing. This is what the opportunity is. What's going on nowadays, Maggie? Are salespeople still meatheads?
I wouldn't say that, but I really think it really depends on the relationship, right? And I think I would say that the relationship I had with KG at Zip was kind of, in my mind, the model relationship where it's a true partnership. And the way I describe it is, if we just all take think about the most valuable relationships we all have in our lives, right? Those are like, how do you approach those relationships? You probably go to those people when you have any questions, or like very early on in your decision-making process, right? You go to someone when something's kind of, you don't have a solution yet, you just have a question that bothers you, you want to talk it out. I would say it's a very similar approach here, where as a sales leader, you really want to involve your biz ops leader early on in the process, right? Not something specific like, well, I just, my goal today is really just to get a lower quota number, so now help me to execute. It's really, what is the company goal, revenue goal for next year? How are we going to achieve it, right? And then what are the assumptions that would go into the drivers, and can we really do these things? These are the kind of conversations I typically have with KG, and it's very early. Like a lot of when the conversation that we have does not involve data, does not involve looking at a whole bunch of numbers. It's really talking high level of like, what is our plan, right? And then we have this, what is once we state the problem and really figure out kind of these different components, then I take that and then I kind of find insights, and then we can further this conversation. But how it starts really is very early on in the process of just saying like, right, how can we make this company more money, right? Let's and that's in line with the company's strategic goals. So I would, high level, I would just say for sales leaders, it's just to right, like I think true partnership, it is when, it's, I think one way to look at it is how early you involve this other person in your decision making process.
I
Well,
can give a very tangible.
So they shouldn't be reaching out to you the night before their presentation. Hey, I need all this, and it's 11 at night. That type of thing.
Because that's not a partnership, right? That's really a service-oriented relationship, right? It's like going to Kinko's back in the day, say, I just need these things printed, right? By this time tomorrow.
Okay.
You now dated yourself by saying Kinko's, right?
That's true. That's true.
And by calling it Kinko's, it's like Kleenex, like everyone knew on this call what exactly you meant, but I'm sure there's other people. Kinko's was a story where you went and made copies of resumes on certain figures. Define that to the Gen Xers.
Thanks for the mansplaining.
Yeah, he mansplained it to us.
I'm not mansplaining. I'm trying to tell the new gen that was so busted.
As a true SaaS hole, he mansplained it. That's awesome. I could give a very tangible example here. Maggie and I worked very, very closely on our enterprise initiative when we decided to, kick it off. Several years into our tenure at ZipRecruiter, and one of the things, my main job, improve conversion rates, period, end of story, full stop. Chief sales officer, improve conversion rates. And Maggie and I observed that our close win rate was absolutely horrible on our enterprise side of the business. And that's that nagging question. And we went into 2020, and Maggie's team broke the whole thing down, the whole sales process. And what her team came up with, was that our enterprise salespeople were doing basically zero discovery and when they would get proposals out to customers. But she went even further, her team went even further and realized that our team was not identifying metrics for success that our customers were identifying. And even further than that, Maggie and her team came up with a process to help us alleviate that, which was quite simply an email that came out every single night for every new opportunity that was created where metric for success was not filled out in Salesforce. And it went out to the directors, the CMO, myself, Maggie, and others. And it created the optics around this one particular metric that was indicative of success. And our win rates, Maggie, I can't even remember how, our win rates went up tremendously when we isolated on that one particular thing. So we could say, so I got Jamie's attention here, by the way, because he's the RevOps guy. Maggie figured out that we weren't doing discovery. Great. But how did we operationalize that? And Maggie identified one particular thing, and that was the metric for success. Our customers were not telling us, and we were not extracting the metric for success. And not only was it a field in Salesforce, but she created this sort of, I'm going to call it a shame email that would come out and created this accountability at the director level, not the manager level, at the director level, to then make sure that this was permeating through the managers and the salespeople. And our win rates skyrocketed in 2020 as a result. And that was a perfect combination of this question that was nagging in my mind, and Maggie's business operations and analyst team helped us move the needle. Sorry for the long diatribe.
How did you identify that? Was it self-reported in Salesforce, or did you guys go along chair sides, or how did you identify that they weren't doing the value metric?
Wow, that was a very specific. So if I recall correctly, I think it's just any problem solving, right? You kind of just pulling on the thread. So I think it probably started out with, I was just trying to analyze, we're looking at close rate, right? So we're just looking at kind of at every stage in the opportunity process, kind of where are the biggest drop-offs, right? And what I think it was a combination of what I realized is there was a big variance going from the discovery stage to proposal stage among all the the various sales reps. So that kind of raised a flag of like, if there's such a big variance among sales reps, my guess is there's some sort of adherence, or right, like everyone's not doing, like everyone has their different ways of approach things, right? So that's kind of led us to look a little bit deeper into, okay, so are folks doing things differently? Like, then, and start with, okay, so what are the criteria, the exit criteria for leaving the discovery stage to proposal, right? And really narrowing down to like specifically, so what in our mind indicates a successful discovery? Then from that, I mean, like we started with just asking the sales managers, the directors, the sales reps, and you get like different answers. And then that again shows in the data, right? Like you look at these, so if we say a successful discovery is we've understood what the customer success criteria is, then we looked and say, well, how can you say that if you haven't even gotten their success criteria filled out? Right? That seems to be an obvious thing. There's also other things like, right, identifying the right decision maker, which wasn't as big of a challenge. So when we look at the number of things, we realize that was one of the biggest challenges is, right, like, folks will just move on because they just send, because reps just send the proposal out. So they use that as an indication of leaving discovery. But that's right, that's more of a processing. But in reality, the rep themselves has not fully understood what success means to this prospect. So I think that's, kind of, you just keep pulling on that thread, and you kind of identify that was one thing that is the most problematic. It wasn't the only thing. It just, we rank ordered, right, all the things that we found and realized that was probably something that would have the biggest impact. And the goal is not for reps just to fill in this data field for the sake of doing it, right? But this is really just get the manager's attention, because if you talk to the sales managers and the directors, they would agree. They would agree that in order to do a successful discovery, you have to at least understand what the customer success criteria are, right? And so when they see that, then they go back and they coach the reps on how to do the discovery process the right way. And I think that's ultimately what led to an improvement in the close rate.
Jamie, just to put a finer point on this, on 2 points, the data point that Maggie came up with was that 50% of the opportunities in the discovery stage went to closed lost. And you think to yourself, oh no, that's a 50% win rate. That's not so bad. No. It went straight from discovery to closed lost, or proposal to closed lost, or some dramatic drop off. It didn't go progress and eventually 50% went to close. It wasn't like that. It was 50% went from that stage directly to close loss. And then, as she said, she pulled on the thread. And I'll remember this, Jamie, Maggie and I had one of our very first massive arguments. I wanted that metric for success field to be mandatory, has to be filled in. And Maggie pounded her shoe on the table like Gorbachev. It was like, absolutely not. We're not making it mandatory. And of course, she was right, because it helped us surface where the issues and the coaching opportunities were, because it had to be a natural thing that was coached upon. And like, once again, Maggie was right. But that data point for you, Jamie, as a RevOps pro, was like right on. It was so insightful.
I think that's very insightful what you just said there, because in Salesforce, the biggest problem I have, Salesforce is a great tool, everyone uses it, but when you start beating the drum on, you need to fill out this, you need to fill out that, you need more, guess what? It gets filled out, right or wrong.
Liars. They're all liars. Sales are all liars.
So it's all garbage. We know it, So I think that's interesting. You didn't make it mandatory.
Yeah, and in fact, if I remember correctly, the email that Jay-Z described, it actually did not go to the salespeople. It went to sales managers and directors and above, right? Because to me, it's really a management issue. This is indicate that to the managers that they have more coaching to do with their reps, not necessarily that, the reps just need to, do some work to fill something out.
I got a question for you. What, now at the two companies, what is in your tech stack today, and what is what you want in your tech stack, like from ZipRecruiter, that was game changer for you in managing a consistent sales process across the board?
Sales process. That one I have to think a little bit more on, but what comes to, in terms of tech stack, what comes to mind is, at Zip, we use this kind of data platform called Periscope. They were, I think, acquired by Sisense probably a few years ago. So now they're part of Sisense. But that's something that I think played a big part in our data-driven culture. I always kind of bold the fact that Zip, our as an analytics team, our speed to insight is very impressive. Right. I think there are many examples where, right, KG and I can just have a conversation about a problem, and I could just pull up Periscope and start typing the queries, and right, and then and then show a chart, and then we'll say, okay, so it's here, and then we'll keep going, and then at the end of that conversation, we've had an understanding of where the problem is and have an idea of like what we going to do to address that problem. To me, that kind of speed to insight is very impressive, and I haven't really seen that elsewhere. The typical workflow is someone throws over a question, right, and then you have an analyst that takes that and then takes time to get the data built and then become something. So that kind of real time, being able to just convert a query to a SQL query to a visualization is very powerful. And I haven't seen any other kind of technology platform do that well. In terms of other, I think, sales specific tech stack,
like you use Outmatch or Outreach, Gong. Those are used.
Yeah, so I think a lot of these are again, depends on implementation, use case and implementation, right? I mean, I think any of these technologies are similar to, I think you described Salesforce, right? It's just a tool, and how you leverage it is, it's more important. But again, I would say, if I have to name, I think a technology that I see a ton of value add, I would say it's Gone. I think, I think that it's truly, to me, not just a recording platform, but a technology, AI powered technology platform where I've seen, sales managers really, again, the ones who believe in the value and invested in that, really be able to use that as an effective management tool to coach their reps, and I've seen great results.
I think that's a great enablement tool. Like, it allows you to understand where are they missing the value rather quickly and look at all the keywords and density in conversations. I think it's amazing. So it sounds to me, speed to data and data. I'm like,
speed to insight is what I would call it.
Speed to insight, yes. And I'm just saying, but the data's got to be real for you to get to that speed to insight, right? And that's one of the problems I always have with Salesforce, especially when it gets a little junky and people say, create pipeline. $1 million pipeline deal starts getting created. So it's always difficult. How do you communicate that so that you're not getting junky data because you're pointing out a problem that the data is like, hey, we have a pipeline creation problem. If you say that to the Salesforce, guess what happens? Pipeline is created, right? So how do you go about being a data person, communicating that to sales leadership so that it doesn't junk up the data just to make us feel better?
Well, I think, that's why I think my role both at Zip and at ServiceTitan is, biz ops and analytics, right? Because I really think that you have to have the end-to-end control. If you, like, again, any issue you see at reporting time, it's just a symptom, right, of a much more upstream problem. Most of the time it has to do with the process, right? Where it's, again, if you didn't capture the data correctly when the events are happened, then no matter, I think today a lot of the data teams I see spend a lot of time at reporting time trying to, make an already poor quality data set into something that is reportable. That's really just fixing kind of not the root problem, but what's on the surface. That's why I think, in my experience, what you have to do is you have to fix, it's a process issue, right? You have to define clear process procedures and data governance of when these data gets captured, right? And that they gets captured correctly, and the training that goes with it, especially when it's user input data like Salesforce, right? At the end of the day, again, this is something that KJ and I talk about all the time, and I used to use this on him all the time. Like, if your sales team at the end of the day aren't disciplined to put in the information, there's no way I could know what our customer, right? Any insight from our customers. Like, at the end of the day, we rely on our sales team to tell us that, right? And so they have to be able to do that correctly. And obviously there's a partnership. So, the way that the interface is designed, we have to make sure that it's as few clicks as possible. Like, all that is true. But at the end of the day, our sales people, what we're asking them to do is, through their conversation, to extract the most important information so we can record it, and then we can aggregate it and, right, derive insight from it later on, right? So to me, my preference is always to fix it at the root cause.
I always say you can ask sales reps for a ton of data, but the more data you ask them to do, the less time they are selling. So be cognizant of the data that you actually need versus the data you want, or you
So
want them to sell.
That's why it needs to be very few, right? And that's why it needs to be valuable.
Yeah,
right. And also anything additional. Yeah, I mean, you have, again, programs like Gone, you can, right, you can kind of get more, but it's really things like, things like when we go from discovery, right, when we reach these milestones in our sales process, that needs to be tight and correct, right? Those indications.
And consistent, right? I mean,
yeah, like, we wouldn't expect a close date to pass and the opportunity still be open. Yeah. Right. Those are the things I think, right? Like, I think it's fair to expect the sales folks to, right? Because at the end of the day, it's not in conflict. It should not be chores to the sales rep. It has to also be helpful for them to manage, right, their pipeline.
The more you can automate the data, the more you can do anything to help streamline the process, the better you are as a sales ops, biz ops, rev ops person. I know I've been talking a lot, so.
Thanks, Captain Obvious. Hey, Maggie and JC, pretty much all the companies now, do they do cadence meetings with leadership where they all get together and they figure out who's lying the least? If so, is business ops a part of that conversation? Because they're trying to make projections based on what's in the funnel and what's real, what's not real. Is that going on? More companies doing it, less companies do it?
What do you mean by a cadence meeting?
Forecast cadence, your weekly forecast cadence call. The biggest time suck in any organization with the least amount of value for every organization, in my opinion.
It's not my opinion, but I want to hear what Maggie has to say.
That's my opinion. I'm waiting for Maggie's opinion.
Yeah, I think cadence meetings are important. And at both companies, the biz ops team actually lead and drives and prepares for the cadence meeting. To me, the goals, and there are different cadences, right? Because you have to think about business. There are things that we want to look at on a weekly basis. There are things we want to look at on a monthly basis, and there are things we want to look at on a quarterly basis, right? So things that are just kind of making sure that things are going as expected. That's more of a weekly type of cadence, right? What's coming up, right? Are we kind of prepared, like a forecast meeting? That is more of a weekly cadence. Monthly cadence typically had to do with headcount planning, right? Looking at our pipeline, because there's a lead time, right? So we want to make sure, right, if we see something coming, we want to inform the TA team to make adjustment to their hiring pipeline. And then quarterly typically have to do with the quota, right? Making sure that the quota capacity is there, the quota planning is still correct and things like that. To me, I like the cadence meeting. I think they're important because to me, it's almost kind of like a contract the ops team have with the sales team of saying like, hey, your job as the sales team is to go out and talk to the customers and sell. I'm here to watch your business for you, right? So, if things are going right, I'll quickly check on we'll have this kind of a checkpoint of say things are going right as expected, or some worrying trend is forming. We don't know, we'll keep an eye on it. But that kind of and also I think it helps to avoid distractions, because again, I understand whenever you know, a lot of times the data or the things that we're dealing with impact someone's compensation, right? And so folks can be sensitive and react to that, like, oh, you know, my close rate dipped for the past 2 days, you know, go find something is wrong. And I think the cadence meeting helps to say like, hey, there are things we look at on a weekly basis, right? So if you set the expectation and you kind of help educate your sales stakeholders that they're right, what are the things that if this is a trend that we have been seeing for several weeks, then yes, something that's worth investigating. But if this is just a 2-day pop, we'll kind of keep going, right? But I think that it's more like a partnership a checkpoint, the way I see it, right? Where you build this trust of saying, you know, you're going to go out and get the business. We're going to be here and watch the business for you.
Is that the difference between data and insights, or what is the difference between the two?
So to me, and I always tell the analysts on my team, right? To me, it's a 3-step process. Step 1 is data or information, right? That's like, you know, if you think about today, we have so much data and they're all stored somewhere, right? The data is just extracting information out of whatever system those data are stored in, right? And that's actually, to be quite honest, not a high value add activity, because today with the technology, there's so many platforms and right technology that can automating that away. So you don't, you know, today perhaps you still need some sort of, you know, a scripting or programming language to do that. But you know, I will have no doubt that in the near future that will be automated away. Then once you have the data, the second piece is insight, right? So what is the data trying to say? There should be a direction. Is this good? Is this bad? Right? It shouldn't just be like, you know, kind of a readout of just what the information is, because everyone can read themselves, right? So the insight is really about interpretation of data. Like I said, I always stress on there should be a direction, good or bad, or really, you know, the variance, like we don't know, which is helpful. KJ and I have many of this conversation where I just say, hey, the data says we don't know. So you now go make a call, right? Because your expertise now is going to be worth more, because there really isn't anything we can suss out from the data. And that's really helpful. So you don't give the impression, the false impression that the data is somehow precise or accurate, that you can get something when in fact it has a big variance, right? Then and that's, I would say, more value added, because, you know, not everyone can interpret it the right way. So if you can do it right, do it with the right insight, I think then that puts you in a category that is right, that your contribution will be higher, and it's harder to automate that away, right? Although I know there are technologies today, especially with AI, that are attempts to do that. And then the third piece is action, right, or recommendation. Basically, it has to be actionable. Otherwise, if you just stops at the insight, then we're no better than a research center, right? That just puts out studies that it's kind of interesting to know, but at the end of the day, we're here to run a business, and what does that translate to the business? So it has to have this action piece, which again, that's why it's important. This what the ops piece comes in, right? You know, you have so to me, it's not just data and insight. It has to come to some sort of action of, okay, today we either stop doing this, or we need to do more of that, right? Or we need to do this new thing, but it has to be something that is actionable.
Means you have to be persuasive, right? Because sometimes you might think it's insightful, but the leaders might not get it. So you have to be able to tell that story as well. But I totally agree with you.
Yeah, but in my experience, and that's something that I really appreciated about Zip, and you know, I've been at ServiceTitan for 6 months now, and I think it's also true here, which is I had never actually have experienced much of the selling. I think if you lay out a good logical argument, it's not so much about its data, just some sort of number. It's laying out a good argument, and also ensuring that because at the end of the day, our incentive, meaning the ops leader and the sales leader, should be aligned, which is for the company to make more money, right? And so if you go from there, you know, and then you're presenting data in a fair way. In my experience, I haven't really encountered too many challenges in terms of just explaining kind of what the insights are and convincing someone to do something you know, they may not originally wanted to.
To answer your question on forecast cadence, I always say here's a good thing to take Maggie's process. Capture all the data that is spent, the hours spent by every single sales rep on forecast cadence, and then quantify that, and then look at how can you reduce that by 20%. Do whatever you can to reduce that, because that's more time you're spent not doing it. That's what I mean by the time suck. I want to shrink that. It's got to be there, but we spend way too much time doing deal review, the same deals talked about, and stuff like that.
What I want to know, that what you guys are in cahoots on, when the board gets a number to the CRO, to ops, the fudge number from the board number when it gets down to the street, how much wiggle room there is in there. But that's a topic for another time.
Yeah, that's a topic.
Maggie, thank you so much for coming on the show. What's the best way for the listeners to find out more about you? LinkedIn?
Yeah, I think LinkedIn probably works the best.
Okay, great.
Maggie, I'm going out to LA. KG, you and Maggie and I need to get some coffee or lunch together or drinks, whatever it is. KG, of course.
Yeah, I could write it off as a consultant.
Well, we need to do that. This was awesome. I would love to talk more shop, but Pete wants to pull the plug as quickly as possible. I'm kidding.
Thanks for listening to the SaasHoles. On behalf of Jamie, KG, and myself, Pete, we thank you for listening. And we ask that you give us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts, subscribe to our newsletter and the podcast notes, and you can always buy us a beer on Patreon/SaasHoles. We thank you for listening. Cue the non-copyrighted music.